If you are following my video lectures, then you know that we have already covered the part 1 of chapter 17 form of charges under section 211 to 217. Now we will cover second part, that is B part, joinder of charges. In this video lecture we will cover section 18, that is separate charge for distinct offences. Before I start, let me remind you that we have already covered section 211 to 217 in a very good manner. Don't forget to check that. For judicial UPSC point of view, you need to understand that section 218 has 2 parts and 1 illustrations. Students doing law course, well, you can just remember section 218 as a section given under joinder of charges. Let's cover section 218 in detail. Subsection 1 of 218 says, for every distinct offence of which any person is accused, there shall be a separate charge. It further says, and every such charge shall be tried separately. So the first part of section 218 informs us 2 things. One, that if many kind of offences are done by one person, a separate charge for each offence will be made. And second thing, it informs us that for each offence, for every such charge which is prepared separately, shall be tried separately. Now many of us will be thinking that we have seen the person is being tried for all the offences together. Yes, this is what is given in its condition, provided that. Now this means subject to condition. Provided that where the accused person by an application in writing so desires and the magistrate is of opinion that such person is not likely to be prejudiced thereby, the magistrate may try together all or any number of the charges framed against such person. So what the accused person can request that he must be tried for all the offences together. And second thing is, the magistrate himself, if is in the opinion, means this is the discretion of the magistrate, that even he can either try for some specific offences together and others separately, or all the offences together. So this is in the discretion of the magistrate. We cannot force the court to do so. But normally we see that all the offences are tried together. Subsection 2, 218 says, nothing in subsection 1 shall affect the operation of the provisions of section 219, 220, 221 and 223, which we are going to cover later on. So it simply says whatever is given in subsection 1 will not overwrite or affect the provisions given under these sections. Now let's cover an important case. Listen to it carefully, otherwise you won't understand. Banwarilal Jhunjhun versus Union of India, AIR 1963, Supreme Court 1620. B and C were partners in a firm which had a contract to supply bottom boards for railway wagons to the railway administration from time to time in different quantities at Bombay, Lalgona and Jhansi. Now what was the procedure? The procedure was that the wood was to be inspected at the sites by the officers of the railway administration, and this is how they used to make the payments, and the bills for the supplies had to be sent with the inspection note attached thereto. I hope you have understood the case till here, that they used to clear the bills with the inspection report. They used to attach that bill with the report of the inspection done by them. But why the case was filed? The prosecution case was that the wood supplied was of inferior quality. Now if inspection report is negative, then the bill cannot be passed, and if the bill is not passed, it is very obvious the supplier is affected. He is in loss. And the 1T and other inspection officers, now this is a code name, had issued false inspection notes certifying the quality of the wood to be as per specification in conspiracy with B and C, and that on the basis of such false certification, the firm have received payment of rupees 3,70,000 from the office of the Ministry of Woods at Delhi. Now in the case, it was contended that Mr. T and other inspection officers had issued false inspection note, and this was done in conspiracy with B and C, and they also received payment for that. This is what the case is. Now, Supreme Court held that the expression every distinct offense has a different content from the expression every offense or each offense. I hope you are understanding this point. What Supreme Court stated, that the expression every distinct offense which is given under section 218 is different from the expression. The court differentiated every distinct offense from every offense and each offense. It further said a separate charge is required for every distinct offense and not for each separate offense. The word distinct means not identical. It stresses that the two things are not the same. Two offenses would be distinct only if they are not in any way interrelated. So it is justifying the exception from section 218 that says for every distinct offense a separate charge is required, but over here it is explained why it is not required. The court further says if there is some interrelation, there would be no distinctness, and it would depend on the circumstances of the case in which the offenses were committed, whether there be a separate charge for those offenses or not. I hope some concept of section 18 is cleared by this case. Now let's check the important part. Effect of contravention of section 218. It's important to know that the provisions of section 218 are mandatory, but it further says the effects of contravention of the provision of this section has been considered by Supreme Court in number of cases. Means although they are mandatory, but there are lots of exceptions. The following principle has been laid down by the Supreme Court. 1. Section 218 is mandatory and its requirement must be strictly observed by the trial court in every case, so that except when a contravention is covered by section 221, 222, means the contraventions are already given in section 221 and 222. There should not be a conviction for an offense for which a distinct charge has not been framed. So the first principle laid down by the Supreme Court is that provision of section 218 is mandatory and it must be observed strictly by the trial court. But there is an exception. Exception is when the same is contradicted by section 221 or 222. It further clarifies that the conviction for an offense cannot be given where a distinct charge has not been framed. But don't conclude. Check the second principle of the Supreme Court. It says, however, even when a contravention of section 218 has occurred and an accused has been convicted for an offense for which no charge was framed, the effect of such contravention is not to render the trial altogether null and void or to violate it straight away. It is not required that the conviction must be forthwith set aside as soon as the appellate court finds that a breach of section 218 had occurred. So I hope you are understanding this point. That first principle, it said that the provision of section 218 are, although they are mandatory and conviction cannot be granted if distinct charge has not been framed. But in second principle, the Supreme Court says, however, if this is not done, if the court has convicted someone ignoring to the fact that a distinct charge was not framed, then the appellate court will not consider it as null and void. I hope you are understanding this point. The court has to apply the mind whether it was prejudiced to the accused or not. Okay, now let's come to the third principle. The effect of contravention of section 218 on the maintainability of the trial and conviction of the accused at its conclusion has to be determined in each case as it arises by the combined effect of the facts and circumstances of that case or provision of section 215, 464 or 465. In other words, the Court of Appeal must carefully scrutinize all the facts of the case for the purpose of ascertaining whether or not such absence of the required charge has in fact prejudiced and misled the accused in his defense so as to occasion a failure of justice. I have already explained. so I don't need to explain this point. So this point number 3 was as per the Supreme Court in Surajpal versus State of Uttar Pradesh AIR 1955 SC 419. The fourth principle, let me cite case law as well. Andhra Pradesh versus Chimalal Pati Ganeshwar Rao AIR 1963 Supreme Court 264. If by the application of this test of the facts of the case, the court comes to the conclusion that the omission to frame the required charges has in fact resulted in a prejudice to the accused and has misled thereby in his defense, the trial is not maintainable, and in such a case, the proceeding must be quashed and the conviction must be set aside. So in this case, it was held that if it is affecting the accused, definitely then such error cannot be ignored and such a conviction must be set aside. The fifth principle laid by the Supreme Court, this was in case Chandrabhal versus State of UP 1971 3 SCC 983. On other hand, if the accused is in fact was not misled in his defense, then since there has not occurred any prejudice to him as a result of such breach, nor any failure of justice, the maintainability of trial is unaffected and the error is taken as cursed by section 464 and 465. In such a case, the conviction must be sustained in spite of the admitted occurrence of breach of section 218. So I hope we have covered the effect of contravention of section 218 very well. Now the question comes as to misjoinder of charges. Let me explain this through a case Sushil Kumar versus Joyshankar AIR 1971 Supreme Court 1543. Supreme Court held that charges under section 408 and 477A of IPC could be tried together. Okay, but how? In this case, several persons accused on several items of embezzlement were tried jointly. The plea of misjoinder of charges was raised at the appellate stage. So I hope you're understanding the point. There were many people and they were charged on several items for misappropriate of fund or stealing money from employer. This is what embezzlement means, and they were joined together. But their advocate took a plea that this was a misjoinder of charges. Now what the court held, let's cover it up. The court held that since no failure of justice in consequence of the joinder of charges had occurred, the question of misjoinder of charges was of little consequence. See, when there was no failure of justice, then the question that misjoinder of charges was there does not occur. This is what it was held in this case. I hope I explained it in a better way. Now comes the next query. Failure to explain injuries on the accused. What inferences the court should draw when the prosecution fails to explain satisfactorily the injuries sustained by the accused? Let's understand this from a case. State of Gujarat versus Bai Fatima 1975 Criminal Law Journal 1084 Supreme Court. It was held in this case that any of the following three results may follow. In what condition? When the prosecution fails to explain injuries on the accused. The three things can be taken up. 1. That the accused has inflicted the injuries on the members of the prosecution party in exercise of the right of self-defense. Okay, that could have been as a result action taken in self-defense. Second thing, it makes the prosecution version of the occurrence doubtful and the charge against the accused cannot be held to have been proved beyond reasonable doubt. Now second thing is the contrary of the first part, that it is doubtful whether the prosecution is stating the true things if the things are not proved beyond reasonable doubt. And the third thing, it does not affect the prosecution case at all, that it does not matter if they fail to explain the injuries on the accused. So any of these things can be considered. Let's understand this from another case as well. State of Rajasthan versus Madho 1991 Criminal Law Journal 1343. It was held that where prosecution evidence was full of infirmities and if the prosecution witnesses do not explain the injuries caused to the accused in the course of same transaction, it gives an impression that the witnesses are suppressing some part of the incident. In such situation, the accused is entitled to benefit of doubt. Now this makes things more clear, right?